नमस्ते सरस्वती देवी गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, everyone. You can hear me, right? Everyone in the back as well. Okay. So the topic for today was actually fake news on my TV, but it looks like we had sent out a fake headline in the emails, so which is apt for today actually. So it was just to attract all of you to the class. Yeah, so thank you again for coming here today, even though the weather is like, I think 0 degrees as the minimum, and like 11 degrees right now outside. So thank you for conquering over the mind. I know it's not easy to come out when it's so cold and snowing outside, but appreciate all of you being here. I beg for the merciful Vaishnavas present here and throughout the world, so that I can get some mercy and speak something that it makes sense and it's not fake. Alright, so what is fake news? So there's a lot of information about fake news. If you just Google about fake news, especially in the past 2 years, fake news has become really important. It can change precedents in the countries. It can change, many different aspects in our own lives. Because once we start trusting fake news, things can go downhill. So we're going to cover a few things about what is fake news, what is Mind TV, what are some of the fake news that plays on Mind TV, and how can we deal with the Mind TV, or how can we deal with the fake news on Mind TV. So fake news or junk news is a type of, this is from Wikipedia by the way, is a type of yellow journalism or propaganda that consists of deliberate disinformation or hoaxes spread via traditional print or broadcast news media or online social media. That's fake news. And the term is also sometimes used to cast doubt upon legitimate news. So even if the news is legitimate, sometimes it can be deemed as fake news. And this is used as a tactic from one political party to another political party. And there's a lot of, and every day in the news there's so much fake news because some people just can't stop tweeting, right? So, anyway, so fake news has become increasingly under the focus of the past 2-3 years. And like I said, nations and presidents have been selected just based on fake news across social media, electronic media, and print media. So just have to be aware of that and beware that fake news can be dangerous. So what is Mind TV? This is some information on Mind. The Mind actually plays, and there's an abbreviation here, acronym for Mind. And Mind magnifies problems. The M in Mind stands for magnifying problems, right? And it imagines pleasures, right? Anybody disagree with me? Please tell me, and we can discuss about it in detail. These are pretty straightforward. It neglects opportunities. When we have opportunities, it kind of helps us in neglecting those. And D, denies realities. So something that is in front of us, it can say that it is fake, right? So it denies realities. So, but The mind itself, the functionality of the mind, when Krishna created mind as part of the body, it was supposed to elaborate what we see outside. So just, through the eyes, we cannot perceive everything, so the mind is supposed to elaborate what we see outside. But it also acts as the inner screen, which, when we close our mind and when we see something like the inner screen, and it's supposed to, basically the function of the mind is to elaborate on what we see outside. It takes several inputs, and based on those inputs, it creates many different impressions, and those impressions we carry forward for not only this life, but for many, many lives, in our total lifetime here in the material world. And Krishna created a body that comes with mind and intelligence. He gave Brahma the knowledge to create a body which has mind and intelligence. Now, imagine for a second that Brahma created the body just with the mind and no intelligence. What would the world look like? The US? Sorry? Yeah, it would look like one big mental hospital, doesn't it? I mean, if everybody had a choice, and if everybody just, got what they wanted, right? The mind would be the whole world would be a mental hospital. So, talking about mental hospitals, there was a man who was just walking across a mental hospital, and he was getting really late to his work. And while he was getting late, he did not, he wanted to figure out what the time was. His watch had stopped working just that day. And he looks at this patient who was just in the garden right outside the mental hospital. He was just walking. So he asks him, "Hey, do you know what the time is?" So this guy, he says, he doesn't say anything. He actually jumps right in front of him, and he takes out a stick. He puts it on the ground. He takes out a carpenter's level, makes sure that the stick is vertical, and then he looks at the shadow, looks at it in the angle, and then how he takes a ruler and he measures how, what is the length of the shadow, and based on that, he tells him, oh, the time is exactly 3:49 p.m. and it looks like it's August 16th. So then he's like really startled. Okay, this is a mental hospital, right? This guy is like really amazing. Like he's telling me the exact time just by looking at this shadow and measuring the whole thing and then calculating the whole thing and telling me the time. And then so he sets his watch to the right time, and then he's like puzzled and he asks him, well, it's really impressive that you gave me the time, the accurate time, but what would you do on a day, on a cloudy day, or in the night? What would you do? Then he shows him the watch on the hand and he says, I would just look at my watch and tell you the time. So, so if we don't use the time, the mind, and if we let the senses control the mind, then we would end up with a world which would look like a big mental hospital. Thanks. Thank you. So, where is the problem, right? So, the mind is, like I said, it's supposed to create, an inner screen for what we are seeing outside and elaborate on what we see, right? But what does it do though? It creates impressions, and based on that, we have, we develop likes and dislikes based on these impressions. So the same food that tastes the same for everybody is liked by some people, but is disliked by some people, because the mind creates that impression, right? And the same music, for example, there's like, I just put an image there of a guy who's playing rock music or something. That same music, someone may be closing their ears when they go and sit in a concert, and another person may be jumping for that music. So dislikes and likes are created by impressions on the mind. For example, my wife, she doesn't like cheese at all, and I love everything that has cheese in it. So where is the problem? Yeah. So the problem is, we have been in the material world for a long, long time. If you take 10,000 years and multiply that with 10 zillion years, that maybe will give you an approximation of how long we are here for. So the same mind is actually getting trained again and again and again. And do you guys agree that just by practicing something for a few years, we can perfect it, right? Yeah? So imagine something we've been practicing for zillions and zillions of years. How perfect are we in that, right? We've been what are we practicing though, right? We've been practicing eating, mating, defending, sleeping, lust, anger, greed. Name those qualities, right? You can keep naming those, and we've been practicing that for zillions and zillions of years. And the only way we can, we've been training the mind for those many zillions of years on these things, and we've become really good at these. We don't have to think about these, actually, just do these things, right? Last time we agreed on just the byproducts of eating, mating, defending, and sleeping. If we just train our mind only on this, there's no way that we can come out of these lust, anger, and greed, and other problems we have. So for a devotee though, we, somebody who comes in touch with Krishna consciousness, right? He has two options, right? One is he can go to Maya or he can go to Krishna. But if we have trained the mind for so many zillions of years on going in one direction, and all of a sudden in this lifetime, we ask it to go in the other direction, what will the mind say? No, we're not, right? So, so that's one of the reasons why the mind behaves the way it does. And when we look at some of the fake news that is played on Mind TV, and the reason for that kind of fake news is because of false ego that we have. And what is false ego? It's the identification with the body. As long as we identify with the body, the lust, anger, and greed will never leave us. So what does it mean by identification with the body? And what does it result in, right? So as soon as we see, okay, somebody has a new gadget with them, what do we say, an iPhone X in somebody's hand? The moment we see that, the mind says, start disliking him. That's the first thing we will say, right? And then the next thing is, get something better than him, right? So that's usually how the mind works. And he doesn't even deserve it, right? And he has that. Why don't you take something? That's true with like not just gas. Imagine somebody has a bigger home or a car. This guy doesn't even deserve it and he has it. You should take one too. You should buy one too. And you know what? Get a better one. Because you can afford it, right? You only have like 8 other loans, right? So, and you have your whole lifetime to pay it off. And as soon as someone walks in the hall, like this Mataji who's walked in the hall with a beautiful sari, oh wow, she has this beautiful sari, and I don't have it, I start disliking her. I'm gonna get something better than her next time, right? Mataji's not the ones here. But even if you become a nice devotee and if you want to think about Krishna conscious things, you cannot think about Krishna conscious things. Because the mind is always coming in between. And then the identification with the false ego of the body and the false ego comes in between. So, same thing with another fake news. As soon as you have an alarm for 4 o'clock, you want to wake up tomorrow, wake up at 4 o'clock, start chanting, right? Let's make a whole New Year resolution, right? And what does the mind do? You really don't want to get out of that bed, do you? Right? That's the first thing it will say. And then it says, after all, this bed is so comfortable, isn't it? And then it says, it's only 4 a.m. You've got the whole day to finish your rounds, right? And then, especially last weekend, it's so cold outside and it's so warm under this comforter, right? Anyway, you don't really like the japa, right? And you worked so hard yesterday, you just need a little rest, right? And how often does this happen? Like every day, Prabhuji, every day, right? So these are the kind of fake news the mind plays on us. And what do we do about it? I mean, anyone had this experience before or is it just me? Thank you. So, what do we do, right? So we have a choice. Either we can say, hey, that's a good idea, and sleep for some more time. Or we can say, shut up to the mind and get up, right? We can do that. So we can neglect what the mind is telling us, or ignore what the mind is telling us, and get up. So I know it's not easy, right? And it takes time. So one of the things Srila Prabhupada recommends is, the first thing he recommends for a new devotee is tolerating the mind's fake news. So he says, again and again, there's in the scriptures, there's mention of tolerating. What does it really mean by tolerating, right? To take a vow to do something, or it could be a New Year resolution to lose some weight as well, or it could be something spiritual. But the mind immediately says, don't do it, right? And then it says, whenever you're tempted by something, it would say, just this one time, just taste this, right? Or just this one time, you can wake up later. Just this one time, you can, not go to the gym, right? So, if you listen to your mind, you will end up in a place where you really don't want to be, right? Is that right? So if we always listen to our mind, we end up in a place where we don't want to be. So that is why our scriptures say again and again about tolerating. Why? Because the mind is crazy. The mind is crazy. Then comes the part of why tolerate. Because imagine, right, if God answered all our prayers, right? And Dalai Lama, I think it was Dalai Lama who said, it's a good thing that God does not answer all our prayers, because our life would be hell if He answered all our prayers. I don't like this person and I say, wish you would die. Imagine the number of people who would be dead by now, right? And if a person is walking and you see a beautiful girl and you say, oh, I wish she were my girlfriend or my wife. Imagine the number of wives you would have and imagine the trouble you would have after that, right? So, the recommendation by Srila Prabhupada is to tolerate what the mind tells you. And it will take some time, because it's very discouraging when the mind is telling you constantly, and when we actually try to tolerate, it will tell you, hey, what is the use of all this? What is the use of tolerating all this? What is the use of chanting so much? What is the use of ignoring me? Come, let's do something. So the mind actually does not let you to tolerate that. And the secret to tolerating is tolerating without getting discouraged. So the moment we get discouraged, and this is like, even if we have to tolerate 1,000,000 times, we have to continue tolerating. And some crazy thoughts come to our mind, and what do? We should say, because it's a thought, in the end, what is coming to us, we don't have to act upon it, right? At that point, when the thought comes to us, we can just stand back and say bye-bye, right? Or we could say see you later, whatever you prefer. And that makes us steady, it makes us determined, and it makes us enthusiastic. When we do that, when we keep doing that to the mind, it makes us steady. And again, talking about why tolerate, right? Because the mind, like I said, was programmed for so many zillions of years not to be in Krishna consciousness, right? We always took it in one direction, and now all of a sudden we are asking it to go in another direction. But the soul, which is desiring to be Krishna consciousness, is also part of us, right? So, if we do not make the soul the controller, then the mind would control us, right? And when the mind starts controlling us, it will be either you control the mind, or the mind will start giving you ideas and will start controlling what you would do. And one day the mind will come to where the heart is. So the soul is where the heart resides, right? And one day, when both of them come together, when the mind and the soul come together, are aligned, that is what we need to wait for. By tolerating, we go closer and closer to that day. Yeah. And if we give up, we again start doing the three things, the 3 C's, which is that criticizing, complaining, and comparing. These are the 3 things that the mind starts doing. And because of that, the 3 C's, we again fall into the trap of the mind. Okay? And we should tolerate until when? Tolerate until we can reprogram the mind, because it's going to take some time, like I said. And the mind again is very subtle, because we cannot see the mind acting on us. We will only realize after we do the act, we realize, okay, the mind actually played some part in it, right? Most of the times. So if we don't want to get in that trap of lust, anger, and greed, we better start tolerating. And how? I'm going to tell you a little bit of how we can tolerate it also. So, like I said, the soul and the mind are different things, and the intelligence is another part of the body. Now, one of the other fake news, and one of the biggest fake news that the mind creates, is that we are the mind. Yeah? And whatever it says, we have to do it. Basically, when it trains it in such a way that whatever it says, we have to start doing that. And it says, do this, do that, say it, and say that, or look at this, or look at that. And Krishna says in this Gita that, but verse 343, last verse of the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that thus knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence. O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, yeah, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So mind can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Also Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. It depends on how we use the mind. We can either use it as a tool or let it act as a weapon against us. So if we train the mind well, then we can use it as a tool. If we don't train the mind and we let it control us, then it will act as a weapon against us. So as long as we can make sure that we separate ourselves from the mind, and if we don't let the mind say that we are the same, then we can separate ourselves from the thoughts that appear in the mind. And then we should realize that, and we will realize that we are not the thoughts and we are only the observers. Then we will be in a position to say, hey, then we are in a position to go back and look at the thought and say, hello, I see you. Yeah, I see the thought. I know you're there, and I choose not to listen to you. Yeah. So we separate the thought, we separate the mind, and then we can realize. So there is some good news. Yeah. So before we go to the good news, we can train the mind, I said, right? So one of the ways we can train the mind is by not listening to the mind. So how do we train the mind? Whenever it gives us it gives us a thought, we can put a different thought in it. Yeah. So, and just imagine that you are in India, and now you're back in Chicago, and now you are in India Parade, and you see a purple elephant. It has some Converse shoes, like four, it's got four legs, by the way. And it's got a New York Yankees hat, okay, reversed hat, and it's dancing in the India Parade, okay. And you're also in the parade, okay, right next to the elephant. And now you can open your eyes. Okay? So, what did I just do? I put a lot of thoughts in your mind. And you were able to imagine that, right? So, whenever a bad thought or a crazy thought comes to our mind, we can do the same, right? We can put our own thoughts in it, right? So, this is how we can control the mind. Yeah? Not that I control your mind and I asked you to do something, but this is an exercise which proves that thoughts can be put in the mind. Yeah. So one of the good news is that Krishna gives us what is called free will. So when the mind controls us, we are not making the choice. We are not using that free will. Let's say. So if you must have all heard, because you guys have come here for so many classes here, it's the free will that we use to come here to the material world, right? So it's the same free will that we can use to go back also, right? So, and if we don't use the free will to make the choice and train the mind, then the mind will again take over. Yeah. So if we don't, if we take the free will, it's like imagine a card, right? And also it's the most valuable thing. The free will is the most valuable thing. When you give into the fake news of the mind, you give away the free will. So the more you give into the fake news, the more you give away the free will. And who do you give the free will to? So imagine there is a card, it's a free will card that Krishna has handed over to you when you came here, right? And as soon as you're here, you give that free will to the card to Maya. And what does Maya say? Okay, run after the money, or run after this, run after that, right? Because you have given the free will to Maya, she will tell you what to do, right? You don't have the choice anymore. But Krishna also says, another good news is that you can get it back from Maya. And if you don't have the strength to get it back, you don't have the strength to train the mind and get it back, then Guru and Krishna will come and they will get it back for you. Yeah? So, let's work towards not giving away that free will to Maya. The moment we give that free will to Maya, then we lose our mind. Then the other term or the other fake news that normally the mind plays is, we say that we can't control ourselves, right? When we see some like gulab jamuns or something, say, oh Prabhuji, I cannot control myself, I have to eat like 4 gulab jamuns, right? And a lady walks into the temple and you say, wow, she looked like Apsara or Urvashi. I could not control myself looking at her. Right? So, no, that's not true. In fact, we have a choice. And for all those people who say that I cannot control myself, the mantra is that I am choosing not to control myself. Yeah. So that is the mantra we should say. So, Prabhuji, I am choosing not to control myself, right? I'm allowing my mind to control instead. So we are lying to ourselves whenever we say we cannot control ourselves. That's a big lie. And be it a gulab jamun or be it an apsara, we always have a choice to ignore it and put a different thought in it, like I said. Yeah? And the more we give, like I said, the free will to the Maya, the more it becomes difficult to get it back also. That's another thing about this. So, let us see what we can do about, the constant fake news that we get here then, right? So, Arjuna also was not free from fake news, right? Of the mind. I mean, imagine like he had, he's a Kshatriya warrior who was so famous, right, for his strength. And he was a fierce fighter, right? And he goes into the battlefield, and at that point of time, mind starts playing with him, right? It's like this, if you are in a cricket field, and if there's a famous batsman, and it's, let's say, two famous teams are playing against each other, and this famous batsman is ready to bat, and the bowler is ready to bowl, and the batsman lifts his bat and says, I am not going to play. Right? This is what Arjuna did, right? He said, I am not going to fight. Why? He started giving so many reasons. He said, compassion, and he said, oh, I'm not going to hurt my relatives, and he said there's no enjoyment, right? He came up with so many, the mind, right? It came up with so many different reasons not to fight. I mean, he didn't have to go to the battlefield to say all that, right? What happened, right? He was good until then, and just in a moment, the mind started playing a game where he threw his bow. This fierce warrior, Arjuna, threw his bow and he said, I will not fight. Can you imagine, right? So this is how mind plays on us, and it creates a fear and anxiety and discouragement, leading to fear. Yeah, this is what happened to Arjuna also. So today we're going to, as a final part, we're going to see how we can use this fear that is created by the mind as another fake news, and how we can use the same acronym and come over the mind. So, the first thing, or the first letter in the acronym for fear is F, which is focus. And then E stands for engaging, A stands for arise, and R stands for release. So let's take a look at these things in a little more detail. So, focus. So there are hundreds and hundreds of problems, right, that is going in the mind. But what is my problem at this point in time? If we bring the focus to the current problem, that is the first step we need to do in order to come over the fear that is created by the mind. And at that point, we reduce it down to the specifics, and it makes it more easier. So when we focus on just one problem that we have at that point in time, yeah, and then we ask the question of what is this problem that I'm trying to deal with at this point in time. Then engage. So engaging the mind on the exact focus problem at that point in time, because during the idle time, mind works overtime. You know, because the more we do not engage our senses in solving that problem, the more the mind works overtime. So we have to engage our senses and think about what I can do about the problem that I have currently on my mind. And problem may not go away, or the anxiety may reduce in that case. You know, when we start focusing and then engaging our senses in solving the problem, even though the problem may not go away, at least the anxiety will reduce a little bit. The same thing happened to me this week also when I was preparing for the class. You know, I only had like 2 days. I was so anxious. And then once I start preparing, actually doing something, you know, you can always like hear a lot, read a lot, but when you start preparing and start writing down things and start putting things together, putting the presentation together, then the anxiety level actually comes down. So it is important to engage in an action that will actually result in something that, you know, that shows that we are working towards the problem. Then we arise, and this is the important part, because we need to understand, like Krishna said in that verse, we need to understand that we live on a higher level, because we are the soul and we are not the mind who is indestructible. The soul is indestructible, right? That's what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. And once we understand that we are above the soul, above the intelligence and the mind, the soul is the controller, then it becomes really easy to handle the problem. So we need to arise to an understanding that we are the controllers. By we, I mean the soul is the controller. So as long as we come to that understanding, and Bhakti Yoga is meant for us to come to that understanding. The whole process of Bhakti Yoga, if you read Bhagavad Gita again and again and again and again, the whole Prabhupada repeats so many times that you are not this body, right? But you are a spirit soul. Yeah? And you can control this mind once you come to that understanding that the soul is the controller and the mind is not. And the soul is above the mind. And finally, we come to the R, which is release. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, in the last chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that if you become conscious of me, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditional life by my grace. And if, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, we discussed about false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. There it is, right? It's a clear message coming directly from Krishna. This is the direct translation. There's no, it's not a purport, it's not something Prabhupada is saying, it's directly from Krishna, and Prabhupada explains that in detail in his purport as to, if we know, if we identify by release, what is it? Anything you can control is teaching you how to let go. So this letting go is something we need to really understand as well and implement. Because by releasing, we acknowledge the hand of Krishna. We know that not everything is controlled by us, but there is this part that I can control, but then there is some things that I cannot control, which is in the hands of Krishna. And by this verse, we can be rest assured that Krishna will take care of that part which is not under our control. Yeah? So, focus on what is in your control and let go of which is not. So it's like, suppose we're walking on a street and the street lights go off, right? And it's completely dark, let's say. And if we have a flashlight, that flashlight, if we use and take, one step at a time, having that faith in Krishna, and eventually, Krishna says that He will turn on the lights for us. Having that faith that those lights will be turned on is the main thing. Yeah? So, it's important for us to think about these four things and try to see how, following these four things, we can come or cross over the challenges that the mind gives us, or the fake news that the mind creates every time and every day. So, in conclusion, we checked out we discussed a little bit about what is mind and how can we come over the mind and its fake news. So, mind stands for, M stands for magnifying the problems, and it imagines pleasures, it neglects opportunities, it denies realities. Yeah? And what can we do in our hands? We have focus, engage, arise, and release. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. If there is any questions, we can take those. Otherwise, thank you. Oh, yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
As usual, thank you for your wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
A lot of information. I have only one question.
Yes, Prabhu.
You talked about free will.
Free will,
So, where does free will work? Is it in intelligence or is it in mind?
So, free will is something that is given as, even though it is not part of the mind or intelligence, it is part of when we come to the material world, it is, like I said, it's another entity that is, it does not live, let's say, but it is another entity that is part of our, body. When we get this material body, Krishna sends us a card with free will, which we also carry back when we go as well. Like it's there in the spiritual body as well. When we, that's something we used. And this is my understanding. If anybody has any other points, they can add on. But this is my understanding that the same free will we have in the spiritual world as well. And accessing that free will, we actually made a decision to come to the material world, to enjoy separately from Krishna. And now that we are here and we are, we have the knowledge thanks to Srila Prabhupada and Bhagavad Gita, we have the knowledge that, this is not the world where we should be in. Yeah. So then we, work towards using the same free will and going back home, back to God. Thank you.
Just one quick comment.
Yes, please.
I mean, a fake news, but maybe to the point of Arjun.
Yes.
I mean, we can go deeper into it. To me, he was beyond the mind,
Yes.
beyond fake news.
Yes. He was a transcendentalist. Yeah, I agree.
It's relative.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
But it's very deep. It's extremely deep.
Right. Right. I completely agree that Arjuna was a transcendentalist and he was past all that. But he gets into a position where he can ask those questions for the benefit of everybody else. That if he did not ask those questions, then definitely we would not be here, Bhagavad Gita would not be there, and we would not be discussing this. Yeah, for sure, he's a transcendentalist and he goes into that position, or he takes that position so that we can get the benefit.
Exactly.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, Prabhu.
So I'd just like to build on what you just mentioned about free will.
Yeah.
So another way to look at it is that it's an expression of love from Krishna.
Mm.
It's not an entity, it's an expression of love from Krishna. And regardless of where the living entity is, Krishna loves us so much, he gives us that free will. So it's an expression of his love that he gives us. And it's up to us how we want to use it and give it back to him.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yep.
Thank you, Prabhu. That was nice. Anything else? Okay. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you very much, Vraja Prabhu, for a wonderful lecture. Let us all express our gratitude by saying Hari Bol. Hari Bol! Look at that. So, as usual, our Sunday feast is possible by the generous donation of devotees, and often people take advantage of this opportunity to sponsor the Sunday feast in memory of their loved ones or celebrating birthday or not. Today we have 3 sponsors this weekend. The first sponsor is Vasanta Kumar Potila Mataji and her son Krishna Kumar Potila, remembering the late husband and father Somayajulu Potila on his birthday. Krishna Potila Prabhu, can you please come forward and take the prasadam? The next is Smaran Madhikanti. The sponsor is Smaran Madhikanti, seeking Krishna and devotees' blessings for the family and friends. And the last sponsor is an anonymous sponsor. So, as usual, let us all pray to Krishna by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra for the benefit of their family and friends. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I have one more quick announcement. In these modern days, sometimes we feel that Bhagavad Gita is 5,000 years old and all the scriptures are very old. Do they really fit in the modern times, right? That's a question sometimes. It comes, we landed on the moon, we have iPhones, the whole world is at our hand. So there's this confusion sometimes that arises. I teach the Sunday school kids. Often this question also comes in my class. So next week we have a very, very special guest. His Grace Yugal Kishore Das. He's a brahmachari who travels. A brahmachari is a monk who dedicated their life for the process of Krishna consciousness. He travels far and wide. He resides in North America, but he travels North America, Asia, and also Europe. So we have the fortune of his association next week. So coming weekend, on Saturday morning and Sunday morning at 11:30, for somebody who's new, for example, if you would like to have an introduction, the topic is called Spirituality for Modern Times. So the 2 days, it's the same topic, for some people Saturday is possible, for some people Sunday is possible. So we would like to invite each and every one of you. And if you think, each one of us have somebody special in our mind, we always wish, I wish they came to the temple, or I wish they came and heard a lecture on Bhagavad Gita or something like that. So we please request each one of you to please sincerely think in your contacts, there may be one or two people who may be interested. So if you can share this information with them, it'll be a fantastic seminar, Spirituality for Modern Times. 11:30. It'll be a kirtan for 15 minutes, 1 hour lecture, and then prasada, lunch prasada. And he will also be speaking on the Sunday next weekend, Sunday evening in the temple. So we request you, or we invite you for this special program and take advantage of this program. Now we can go and take the blessings of the
Where is the venue for the program?
Good question. I was going to, I guess for you.
Is it a free program for everyone?
Yeah, it's a free program. Everybody is welcome. So it's basic introduction to spirituality. The venue is, we have tentatively planned in the temple, but depending upon the audience and the number of people. Sorry, I should have mentioned this. You will be receiving a Facebook invite. Also, we'll be sending out an email communication with the final details. Okay? Anybody else has questions?
Is the topic on Saturday the same as the Sunday?
Yes. So it's similar, and if, Prabhu will definitely cover many of the topics too.
Sunday feast.
Sunday feast topic is yet to be decided. Yes. Okay. Any other questions on this program?
So will there be invites that will go to?
Yes, you will be receiving an invite either tonight or tomorrow morning. Yes.
And this is like we can accommodate as many people as we want. Or is there
Yes, we are ready to host as many people as we can. So, yeah, wonderful. I love the enthusiasm. Okay. Thank you very much again for joining us to the Sunday Feast. Please go take the blessing of the deities and you can have one of the downstairs.